Hey everyone, Josh here, the Wargaming Noob, back with another Wargaming Noob podcast. This time around, I talk about my transition from standard, regular wargaming into historical wargaming. So I really don't know how long this podcast is going to be. Like I said in my first podcast, I kind of just do it off the cuff and kind of just go with the flow. So we'll see how it goes. And and in any case, before I go into the subject of what I want to talk about today, I wanted to provide an update for both Wargaming Noob and Wargaming Noob Historical and what my plans are for the rest of the year now that we're at the latter part of the year. I'll start off with some updates about Wargaming Noob Historical. The channel has been very strong this past year. In fact, October 1st will be the 1 year anniversary of the channel opening up and starting. So if you've been following the channel for a little while, you know that I've actually put a challenge to myself to try to get the Hail Caesar Roman Invasion of Britain 2-player starter all painted and built and ready to go, in the hopes of being able to do a couple Hail Caesar battle reports before the end of the year. And while I've made some decent progress with that set, I think I was too aggressive and maybe too overconfident in my skills as a painter to actually get this completed by October 1st, which is, I believe, next Thursday or Friday. I'd have to take a look at the calendar, but I think I overestimated my skill and the amount of time I had available. Looks like I'm not going to make that deadline, but the good news is that I have completed, or pretty much completed, building and painting the Roman half of the 2-player starter. And although I'm going to miss the date that I set to complete the 2-player starter, I will continue to work on the Celt side and hopefully have it done by the end of October, after which James and I will move forward and do a play it from the box battle report, and then an escalation type or progressive type of campaign where we add units and build up, at least 2 divisions worth of units for Hail Caesar. So that's Hail Caesar in a nutshell. Another thing that I've been working on is black powder and the Waterloo 2-player starter. So this starter is actually the reason why I'm so behind on Hail Caesar. I got caught up in starting some Napoleonic stuff and got a little over enthusiastic, and that delayed my Hail Caesar build. But in any case, I'm hoping that by the end of the year that I'll have the Waterloo set built and painted up so that we can start off 2022 with some Napoleonics, mainly black powder, but we're also looking into getting into the Chosen Men, which is an Osprey Blue Book skirmish game set in the Napoleonic era. Also have Absolute Emperor, which is another Osprey Blue Book Napoleonic game. So top of the year 2022, we're hoping to start making content for Napoleonics. A couple more things for the historical channel. We will continue to do Bolt Action, which is some of our more popular videos on the channel. Recently got the Island Assault 2-player starter, so James and I will actually be doing a campaign in the Pacific using the Mariana and Palau campaign book. We're getting our table ready for that and getting scenery, or actually terrain that is appropriate for the Pacific, and then we will do a campaign for that. But speaking of other campaigns for Bolt Action, we are also going to do a Crete campaign. James recently got the Duel in the Sun campaign book, and while it only covers Greece and Crete in like a very small portion of the book, I think we can build out a small campaign that goes through the course of the Crete, the battle for Crete, and that's what we're very interested in doing. A couple of my unboxings have been Fallschirmjäger related, and in fact there will be another one coming soon that kind of just builds up the Fallschirmjäger army that I'll be deploying in the Crete campaign. James has already gotten a couple boxes of Commonwealth infantry, as well as a cruiser tank and a Matilda tank. So I think he's pretty much set. I just need to build my German forces for Crete. So a couple games that have kind of fallen by the wayside are Flames of War, Team Yankee, and the first game that we actually did battle reports for, and that was Dust 1947. We do intend to do all of this before the end of the year, hopefully. Things have gone a little crazy because James started working over the summer, and so our time to film has been limited. But, you know, we'll see if we can get some Flames of War. We definitely want to do a play from the box, World War III, Team Yankee, 2-player starter, and then kind of maybe build our forces from there. And then we absolutely want to go back and do a Dust 1947 battle report or two before the end of the year. So that's what we're hoping to do, but we'll see where it goes. Again, we have Hail Caesar and Bolt Action that are kind of our primaries right now. So that's the update for Wargaming Noob Historical. I'm going to seg over to Wargaming Noob, the OG channel. So because I've been working on Historical for the past year, the OG channel has kind of fallen by the wayside. However, I kind of want to breathe some new life into it. We did recently get 100 subscribers, which is fantastic. After 4 or 5 years of trying to do that, I learned a lot of lessons from starting Historical, and am now applying it to Wargaming Noob. So hopefully, you know, again, Historical is probably going to remain my main channel, and that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about pretty soon. But Wargaming Noob will cover games that aren't historical. That's mainly Infinity, hopefully some Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Underworlds, stuff like that. So my plans for Wargaming Noob will be to continue doing Infinity content, because James and I have recently returned to the game. Now that Code 1 and N4 are out, we're relearning it. And I dumped a lot of content that I filmed like a year or two ago into the channel, just to kind of keep the content, you know, flowing. But I've had to slow that down because I did receive feedback on the unboxings that I did, and have been requested to maybe elaborate a little bit more on the unboxings, because really my unboxing videos are kind of, let's take a look at what's inside, and that's it. And it's mainly for historical purposes for folks who maybe pick up a model that's several years old, which a lot of these are, you know, or are thinking of getting them on, just want to see what's inside the box. And that's really what my unboxings are about. However, I've been requested to kind of elaborate on that, maybe assemble the models, because currently all of the Corvus Belli models are metal, and, you know, obviously metal is challenging for some folks, especially if they're coming from Games Workshop or other companies that make mainly plastic models. So I'm going to incorporate that feedback. So it's slowed down my unboxings for Infinity, but I do have a big one coming out hopefully in the next month or so, because I will be incorporating that feedback that I received, and that is for Operation Cold Front. I think the second to last Operation 2-player starter that was released in N3 or 3rd edition of Infinity. I was able to find it at my local game store, which is something that I missed the first time around when it came out about two and a half years ago. It's Aleph and Ariadna, the Tartary sectorial. So, you know, it's not highly available anymore. It might be useful to see what's inside it in case somebody like, you know, myself find it at their local game store and want to use the 2-player starter for Infinity and for Code 1. They're great looking figures, so really I'm going to incorporate the regular unboxing and then kind of a build and a review of how hard or easy some of these models are put together. So that's what I'm going to do. So I put a little bit of pause on the Infinity unboxings, but, you know, hopefully we'll get back on track soon enough. The next thing that I'm planning for is that my daughter has recently shown interest in wargaming. So I'm trying to find a game system that would be easy for her to learn and would also have figures that would appeal to her as a female neophyte wargamer. I think we're going to go with either Age of Sigmar or Warhammer Underworlds. And now it's just a matter of getting models for her and building them up, showing her how to paint them and all that fun stuff. So it's going to be pretty awesome. Hopefully she remains interested in the wargaming. I know she watches James and I when we're filming our battle reports for Historical, and she kind of wants to get in on that action. So that's the plan. Get her into Age of Sigmar and or Warhammer Underworlds. And then I guess the last thing is I do have an interest in Middle-earth strategy battle game. I did end up getting the starter about a year ago. I recently unboxed it and will be editing and uploading that before the end of the year. And that might be another game that would be of interest to my daughter. So hopefully that's what's gonna happen, and we'll get that uploaded and all that. So unfortunately, most of my effort will be with the Historical channel, but I'm hoping to still provide content on WarGamingNewb that's not historical. And we'll kind of go from there. So those are the plans for the end of the year for both channels. Now, let's move on to the main subject of this podcast because it's almost been 12 minutes. All right, so I don't have anything scripted about this subject, but I did want to talk about it because it has been a huge part of my life this past year. Since the end of the summer last year. That's about the time that I started WarGamingNewb Historical. I've always been interested in history, mainly ancient history as a kid. Growing up, I read a lot of stuff about Greek history as well as Greek myths and legends and stuff like that. And then as I transitioned into high school, I got very interested in Roman history. More specifically, early imperial Roman history. Growing up, it was hard to not know about Roman history because of all the sword and sandal movies that are out there. Like Ben-Hur and even the old movie, The Fall of the Roman Empire, which to me was, it blew my mind that there could be a movie out there that would talk about the fall of the Roman Empire and all that. It was just such a huge subject. Obviously growing up, getting older, you realize that it wasn't just one event that made the Roman Empire fall, and that was more of a gradual thing over a couple hundred years. But for me as a kid or me as a teenager, just that the title, The Fall of the Roman Empire, it really captivated me. And so ever since then I'd been interested in Roman history. Obviously movies play a huge part in how one forms an interest in certain subjects, and for me, movies, especially historical movies, spoke to me as a child, and then as a teenager, and then as a young adult. It wasn't until last April 2020, as a wargamer, I decided, let's try something a little bit different. James and I have been playing Age of Sigmar and Privateer Press games and Warhammer 40k 8th edition. We were playing a lot of that, but we wanted to try something a little bit different that could be hopefully just as much fun. So about April of 2020, I decided to just get Warlord Games SPQR. It had just come out, the 2-player starter. And 2-player starters are great because you get 2 forces, and if you have another player with you, you're able to get into the game easier. This starter set used, the Warlord type resin, the little soft plastic almost. So it was easy to assemble the models, and again, it touched on a cornerstone of my youth, and that's my interest in Roman history. We played it a few times, and then after a little bit, the first edition of SPQR was okay. They recently came out with a revised edition of the core rulebook, so there's been a bit more interest in it now. But back then, there was just some things that didn't work as well or was as elegant as it should have been in terms of a complete and finished game. But again, this is a first edition, obviously more opportunity to create a better version of the game, which just recently came out. So, the thing about SPQR is that it is a historical skirmish game, and it does share models with Warlord Games' Hail Caesar. And so our next purchases for SPQR were kind of centered on trying to, be able to apply those models to both games, which then led to me getting into Hail Caesar. Although, we let that sit for a while, the interest was always there, and, we were trying to build armies for both games so that it would transition okay. So, as you know, with Hail Caesar, we're at a point where we're about to start playing like almost a year later than when we first started getting into it. But, it really is a commitment in terms of time when it comes to building and painting and learning the appropriate ways to do historical wargaming, especially in the ancient era. So we're not getting into that. But moving from SPQR to Hail Caesar, James and I did want to find another like more modern game in terms of historical content, and that led us to Bolt Action and getting into Band of Brothers and all that fun stuff. So obviously skirmish level game, but set in World War II, and who wouldn't want to buy a bunch of tanks and stuff like that? So that's how we got into Bolt Action. But then, it being a skirmish game and us having a limited amount of space, it's not as if we could, play on a larger table. We do have a table, we just don't have like a map, because most of our maps were 4x4s, because historically, quote unquote, we played a lot of skirmish games or smaller point levels of certain games like Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar, which you could play on a 4x4 table. And that's what we had. But we wanted to play larger scale games on a 4x4 table, and that's when we kind of segged into Flames of War, because 15 millimeter, you can fit a whole lot of 15 millimeter on a 4x4 table. And yes, we are aware that most people play Flames of War on a 6x4 table, but we've found that the 4x4 works for us, because if you've noticed anything about the battle reports that we put out, is that they're fast, they're quick, less than an hour most of the time. I think the longest we've had in a battle report is about 40 to 45 minutes. And that's, due to certain circumstances. We only have a limited amount of time to play in limited room, and we do have a 5-year-old running around who wants to play with us as well, my youngest son, but is not quite there. So, obviously you need to get this done fast. And so, that's the kind of limitations that we're under in terms of filming battle reports, and that also informs our choices of games, whether it's for sci-fi, fantasy, or historical. But anyway, we got into Flames of War because we could fit it on our 4x4 table, and then we kind of just, coasted along and went from there. Now we're getting into Napoleonics, which will require a much larger table than we have existing, although we can play, or we can adjust our gameplay for certain things in order to accommodate the game on a smaller table. And, we're trying to figure that out. That's why we're pushing Black Powder out till early next year. But in any case, that's kind of just a brief overview of how we got into historical wargaming. But personally, on a personal level, because of my huge interest in historical events, especially ancient stuff, and now World War II, I find that these types of games are more interesting to me than Warhammer 40k, which is still a great game, but I kind of lost heart when I felt like Games Workshop switched to 9th edition a little too soon, and it looks like their business model for both Age of Sigmar and for Warhammer 40k is to release a new edition, maybe every 2.5 to 3 years, which I feel is too quick, especially when they haven't updated certain lines of figures in a long time. And I'm an Eldar player. I haven't had really any new models since the 90s, with the exception of the Howling Banshees and Jane Czar. It's disheartening as an old school player of these games to not have new stuff being pumped out. And I get it. It has something to do with the interest and what people are buying. But at the same time, either, update everything or just drop them, because what's the point? If you're only catering to one side or a few sides of your gaming audience and not to everybody who's interested in the game, then, you're not going to have those players come back, right? New stuff is always exciting, especially if you haven't had new stuff in 20 years. So, a little tangent there, but the whole reason why I got into historical wargaming is because you can use your old models. In fact, you don't even have to use company-branded specific models for a wargame. All you need are the rules or rule system and just a bunch of figures. Example. Bolt action. A bolt action is built off a 28 millimeter scale type model, but you can play it in 172 scale, and I have a few videos on the historical channel that talk about that, of building armies in 172 scale. That's the fantastic thing about historical wargaming. You don't have to worry about getting new stuff. New stuff is great, and Warlord and other companies release new stuff all the time, or improved, model kits over time. But your old stuff from 10 years ago, still usable, right? Flames of War is another example. They release plastic kits. They have a new soft type of plastic for their infantry. But other than like a bunch of the rules moving over to version 4 of the game, you can still use your models, or at least most of them. I think Flames of War is a little bit different. I wasn't playing Flames of War in version 3, but I understand that a number of models and rules have disappeared from version 4, which is another touch point that we can talk about later, because it's a whole different thing for the Flames of War community, or at least from what I've read. But in any case, historical games are usually, miniature agnostic. You can use miniatures from different lines, as long as, I think the main thing is that aesthetically, you want most of your figures to look pretty similar in terms of scale. And, 28 scale with one manufacturer and 28 scale with another, there could be a huge difference. But the fact that historical war games, miniature war games are miniature agnostic, means that you can use any figure manufacturer to source your models from. And that's another thing that's fantastic, because it's no big deal. Really, for historical wargaming, all you need are the core rules and some models. And I think the most challenging part is the terrain, because if you're like me and you're coming from sci-fi and fantasy wargaming, you don't have a lot of historical terrain. But in any case, that's all you pretty much need for historical wargaming, and at least to seg into it, you need a set of rules, you need a bunch of miniatures, and you need terrain, and that's it. Right? Nothing's retired unless it says so in whatever rule set you're using. Flames of War, for example. So that's another reason why I got into historical wargaming. You get to a point in your life where other things start appealing to you more, and with my inherent interest in history, it was kind of a no-brainer to transition into historical wargaming, because obviously you can relive the battles of history and so on and so forth. So as I got older, this appealed to me more than the sci-fi and fantasy stuff, and that's where I'm at. And I found my greatest success in YouTube doing historical wargaming content. So another thing about the historical wargaming community is that it's very welcoming, and I think that's in its nature only because historical wargaming doesn't hold a candle to like sci-fi and fantasy wargaming. Historical wargaming has been around for a long time. What I'm trying to say is that it's been here for a long time. But obviously sci-fi and fantasy are very lucrative and interesting genres to wargame with, and for some folks, historical wargaming really doesn't hold any interest because it's I don't know. I don't find it boring, but maybe some folks do. And so because of the the niche, that because historical wargaming is a niche community, I find that it's more welcoming and more instructive in how to get people interested in the hobby, in the historical wargaming hobby. I've met a lot of wonderful people in the historical wargaming community that have been supportive and instructive, and just encourages me to continue on doing content for historical wargaming and learning new historical war games and getting my children into them, and defining a tradition for my family of historical wargaming as opposed to sci-fi and fantasy wargaming. James is a perfect example. He shares a lot of my interests, including an interest in history, and that's why you guys see him in my historical wargaming content, because he's just as interested in it as I am. I mean, yes, he's interested in other things, but this is something that he and I share as a father and son, which is another fantastic reason why I'm into historical wargaming. And because my 5-year-old is seeing me and his older brother doing historical wargaming, now he's interested. And the funny thing is, for us as kids, or at least a specific generation of kids, we grew up with like plastic army men and stuff like that. And it's still a popular thing to get, and a cheap thing to get from Amazon. I got Liam, who is my youngest, who's interested in like tanks and stuff. I got him a 135 scale Koenigsegg King Tiger, and he loves that thing. In fact, the plastic that it's made out of, injected mold plastic, I think will take primer very well. So if I was inclined to, I would paint it in German camo for him. He also has 135 scale plastic soldiers. So I mean, that's just a way for me to keep enjoying historical wargaming, because I have my oldest son, James, who is playing these games with me and filming them with me. And then I have my 5-year-old who is interested in it, and he will be the new generation, or the new age group of getting into historical wargaming. I think in a similar vein to Imperator Vespasian, who throughout the course of his YouTube career had his son always playing against him in these games. And I don't know how long he's been doing it. I think it's been 6-7 years, maybe even longer. But you kind of see his son grow up as they play these games, to the point where, now he's older, but he's still playing these historical war games with his dad. Another channel that is an example of that is a Miniature Game Montage. They've been playing for a long time, father and son team, and you kind of see like how they did their war games a few years ago as opposed to now, and seeing his son grow up kind of with the channel. It's fantastic. So I mean, those are a few reasons why I transitioned into historical wargaming. Maybe I'm getting older, and just the luster of sci-fi and fantasy games is kind of waning a little bit. I'm finding more and more interest in historical wargaming, and in fact, I'm at the point where I have to kind of slow down, because got Hail Caesar, got Bolt Action, Flames of War, Team Yankee, going into Napoleonics, which is an entirely different subgenre. That's just gonna. There's so much that you can do in historical wargaming, because historical wargaming spans the history of humankind, right? And now I want to get into like the pike and shot era. I want to get into to other eras of war, like the Franco-Prussian War, the Crimean War, and Black Powder, or in that sort of game system. But that's another thing about historical wargaming, is it spans the breadth of humankind. So you can pick anything, and as long as there's a rule set for it and some miniatures, you can have at it. So All right, I am at 30, almost 32 minutes here. I feel like I've been rambling. I don't know if that provides any useful insight to you guys. Again, the subject was transitioning into historical wargaming, at least my transition into it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It's weird because sometimes I feel like I'm just rambling here. Maybe that's what these podcasts are. They're just my ramblings. But hopefully I provided some insight for you guys. If anything, let me know about your transition into historical wargaming. Or if you're not transitioning into historical wargaming, what would interest you in getting into it? It's a great community. Has a lot of different eras of gaming that you can get into. And for some of us, especially some of us who are older, who have kids, it's a great way to spend some time with your kids. But I think that goes with any hobby. Anyway, if you enjoy this podcast, go ahead and click like. Subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. I'd appreciate it. Hit the bell notification icon so you can get notified of all new podcasts and other content coming out of the Wargaming Noob and Wargaming Noob Historical Channel. And then click the link in the description below to join our Discord server. That is the best way that I can personally communicate with you guys and learn about you and talk about wargaming and all that fun stuff. So, all right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for another Wargaming Noob podcast from Wargaming Noob and Wargaming Noob Historical. Thanks, guys.